Today, Friday, May the 30th, the more I talk about it, the more I realize that Canada, I think, is just like the average business. If you've been listening to these episodes, I'm a few episodes in. And as I get thinking about it more and I try to put together kind of my thoughts about what's the big deal about trying to start a business in the US and spend more time in Spain while decreasing my exposure to Canada, the more that I read about the stats, and in particular today, I'm going to be talking about productivity. It's really just like Canada is just like your average business. And again, I have this philosophy that 80% of the business is done by 20% of the companies, and then 20% of the business is done by 80% of the companies in a given market. So that just means if you're not in the top one or two spots in your marketplace, then you are competing for low margin work. You probably have trouble with your cash flow, you can't grow, and there's a whole bunch of things that go along with that. And I feel like Canada fits right into that tough spot in the marketplace where, for example, if we take something simple like AI, which is kind of a big deal right now, you kind of have to be living under a rock to not realize that between robotics and AI, there's like a new gold mine that is being discovered in Canada right now, ranks 17th globally in manufacturing robot adoption, which is nuts because we do some manufacturing here. It's not like we don't do anything, but we're just not something that's important to us. But then as I zoom out from that, you sort of think that that's usually the case. That's actually the case with a lot of businesses. And so when we think about productivity, being a business owner, being an entrepreneur, you take people, you take resources, you look to create value out of that, which comes in the form of solving a problem in the marketplace that people are having. To the extent that you can solve that problem for a price, your costs, at a price that is higher than your cost, then that means you've created some value and you can be profitable. That's like the simple equation, right? But there's things you can do to be productive, which means that as you grow, if you do 100 orders, your 100th order shouldn't cost you as much as your first order because presumably you've got more orders to spread your costs out over. So Canada is stuck in like this productivity crisis, but it turns out that Canada being stuck in a productivity crisis also means that like Canadian businesses are stuck in a productivity crisis. And there's really like three ways to get more out of your existing expenses. You can purchase machinery to help. If it takes a worker 5 hours to make a widget, it might take a piece of machinery 1 hour to make a widget. And even though you have to pay for that machinery, there's a payback window. And, after the 1,000th widget that's generated, the machinery is paid for itself and everything else is just upside. So you can buy machinery. You can use computers and electronics. An example would be creating, like in our company, for example, in our construction company, we have our own proprietary project management system, but it works really well on a mobile device. You don't have to be sitting in front of a desktop computer to use it at a desk with a chair. You can do it on the road. You can do it on a job site. So like computers and electronics. And then software. Software, of course, is the big one right now, which is experiencing a lot of growth because companies are realizing, like us, we're paying all of this money for all of this software, but the truth is software is like a race to the bottom right now. And as long as you own your data, really the only thing that you need is just kind of the front end so you can like access your data. But companies are just in Canada, they're not doing any of that right now. And this is like broadly speaking. So you have to ask yourself, like, why aren't companies doing this? Are they just dumb? Do they just not like understand what the point is? And I think it's more than that. I think, first of all, I'm not sure that we see any really big visions in Canadian industry or in the Canadian economy. In fact, if you listen to my last episode, the statistics would sort of indicate that Canadian businesses are in a holding pattern, looking to not really do anything until there's a measure of certainty with whatever the tariff situation is in the US. So as a result, what that means they're doing is they're trying to use the money they have, make it go as far as they can make it go. Instead of hiring more people, they're just trying to, maybe use a little bit of software to squeeze a little bit more productivity. But they're not hiring, they're not purchasing equipment, they're not making any big decisions because of the kind of environment we're in. But even before the whole tariff thing, there was just this gradual productivity decline that Canada was experiencing because Canadian businesses are experiencing it. And I think that comes back to there's no vision as set by the government to say, here's where we're going. We want industry to come alongside of us and make this happen. I think that's because philosophically, those ideologies don't line up between, say, someone like me, who sees the government as really just meant to be like a referee in the marketplace or a goalkeeper. They're not meant to be a player on the field. And in Canada, unfortunately, they are a player on the field. But I just think there's no vision set. And because there's no vision set, when you look at like our budget and our tax structure, everything just seems disjointed. Nothing is working towards one destination. And so businesses are just left on their own to try and do the best they can. But business is really, really tough. And so when you're working in an environment where you don't know how to be better, you're not incentivized to be better. It's just really, really, really tough. So the government can do things to stoke that vision and increase that productivity, but over time, the productivity drops. And just to place it like in perspective, I got the stats here in front of me, and Canada's productivity only grew 10% over the last 10 years. So that basically means like 1% productivity improvement. So said a different way, can you imagine if you ran a business and that business generated $1 million a year gross revenue, and you had sleepless nights, you had to sign for a line of credit for working capital, you had to make sure your payroll remittances were in, and every year you're only growing by $10,000. Like that is, so $100,000 over the 10 years, but over each year, $10,000. Like you're doing all of this work and effort over a decade for an extra 10 grand a year. Like you as a business owner would just say, I'm out. Like, why am I even doing this? And that's kind of the moment Canada's in. Canada's gone through this decade of like, why do we even bother? Business owners are looking around saying, I'll just maintain the status quo. I won't work very hard to try and expand. You get people like me that are just saying, look, it's no big deal. If that's the way the field lays out, then that's the game I'll play. I'll just go do something else because it's not worth doing it here. So in the US, however, I think their stat is something crazy. Like their productivity grew 148% faster than Canada from 2003 to 2023. So like the number one player in the marketplace is like way, way, way ahead of Canada. Canada can't even like begin to catch up. So Canada by default invests significantly less in productive capital per worker in the US or per worker than what the US does. And so if you're like wondering, well, what does that actually mean? Let me get you like a really good definition here because I wrote it down. Hang on. So Canadian businesses spend less per employee on tools that produce a better output. For every dollar that the US puts into productivity, software, machinery, computers, Canada puts in about 70 cents into its workers, which means that the average American is getting more tech, more machinery, more software to get more things done. And Canadian workers are being asked to do more with fewer tools and older equipment. So it's like the analogy would be we're asking Canadians to dig the same ditch as Americans, but Americans have a backhoe and Canadians have a shovel. And so that earlier when I opened this podcast episode, this episode, I just said, it seems to me like Canada reflects the average business. And then as I hear myself talk through the challenges that Canada is facing, it really is a reflection of the broader market of average businesses that are all struggling with the same thing. So again, imagine you're running a restaurant and you're competing against a restaurant on the other side of the road. They've got smart inventory, they've got a POS machine, they've got automation, and you running your restaurant, you're basically taking orders on a napkin. Like that's how vast the difference is between Canada and the US. And so there's lots of things I think that could change that. But at first, I think it starts with the mentality of a business owner like me, who does reflect the average business owner, I think, which is saying, look, I may not want to hire more people per se and take on more risk in my business because with every person I hire, in our business in particular, I'm taking on more risk. But maybe what I'll look to do is I'll look to try and figure out, how do we invest in our people so that they can do better work? And then the work that they're doing, can we pass it off to tools? Can we get AI? You hear me talk a lot about software automation and ChatGPT. So how can I try to do more with less? And I think if every business owner attempted to do that, then we would see, like, instead of 1% productivity, increases every year, we could see, 2 or 3% if business owners in Canada could do that. And I think the government could help with that. I mean, we're living in a country where the majority of people want to see the government running the game on the field, which is fine. That's not my opinion, but that's the country I live in. So the government could be doing a couple things. And a couple of things that they could do is, for example, let's say that you bought a big piece of equipment that allows like in the shovel analogy, right? If you're digging a ditch, you got a shovel. But if you bought a piece of machinery, the government could say, look, and I think they did this for a small period of time, but you could say, look, normally when you buy a piece of equipment, you can only expense it over 5 years. So if you spent $100,000, $20,000 a year, you can write off against your income. What they could say is effective January 1st, anything bought in the calendar year 2025, you can write the whole thing off. So if the piece of equipment costs you $100,000, you can write it off in that first year, which means you can recover your money quicker and you can become more profitable faster. It's not that the equipment is expensive per se. It's just some business owner would say, well, why would I buy a new piece of equipment when I've already fully written off my old piece, and I'll just keep using it to generate the money I've always generated historically, because there's no incentive for me to buy another piece of machinery to try and do better. So the government could just do things like that. They could make it easier for you to purchase equipment and become productive. They could remove regulatory preferences for certain firms. So they would say something like, well, here's an example, right? So summer students, there's a big article out this week that says summer students are having a hard time getting a job because companies aren't really hiring them. But what the government could do is the government could say, so the summer student problem is one thing, but on the same day, Dubai said they're giving every single person living in Dubai a premium plus paid subscription to ChatGPT to try and encourage their economy, their society to use AI. So the government could do something like that in Canada where they would recognize, hey, we're having a hard time getting students summer work. Industry isn't hiring them for a whole bunch of reasons that are outside of our control. But to encourage businesses to do that, they could say, look, if you commit to taking on up to 5 summer students in your business, and they are going to help automate your accounting, your production, your operations, your safety reporting, something significant, then we will allow you to deduct the cost of their pay for the period of time that you have them over the summer. So we don't have to not be productive. We just have to be creative in how we're thinking about what is the outcome, or we have to, first of all, set an outcome that we want. I don't really know what we're trying to work towards in Canada. I think right now it just looks like Alberta not leaving. But after you sort of set what the goal is, then you have to get creative in how do you get there. And it doesn't have to cost money. Sometimes it just means sliding money around. So I started this episode with saying I think that many of the Canadian businesses reflect like Canada. So if I have a problem with Canada, it means I have a problem with the average business in Canada, because productivity is just falling. And I think there's just a general sense of resignation from the business community that why bother? Like the government isn't the wind in our sail. They're actually a headwind that we have to push against. And that's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to be 17th place in the world for anything. We could be number 1 or number 2 in certain things. And at this point, we're just not. So if you're a business owner, that probably pokes at a couple of sore spots for you. But there's also, hopefully there's some information that you just heard too that helps you figure out how can we be more productive. And it has me thinking too, even though I have a business plan that I'm working on to get into the US and I'm looking to sort of slow down what I'm doing here in Canada, I am still very focused on, I'm a Canadian, I have a Canadian business, and we're responsible for a lot of people that work for us. And so I am thinking through as well, software is my jam. I really get it, software. But are there other things that I could be doing to try and help make our business more productive as well? Because, I don't know, maybe you just lead by example at some point.